Dr. Clarice Hartwell arrived at Meridian Pavilion shortly after sunrise, the first rays of light catching the polished glass facade and reflecting a promise of grandeur. As founder and majority stakeholder of the Pavilion Luxe revamp, a $500 million endeavor set to redefine luxury retail, she carried herself with calm assurance. Her tailored charcoal suit and understated silver jewelry marked her not only as a woman of impeccable taste, but also of unquestionable authority. Stepping onto the crimson carpet that guided VIPs from the grand entrance to the inner sanctum of executive meeting rooms, Clarice offered a polite nod to the poised doorman and smiled gracefully at the valet team, who opened the sleek doors of her car without hesitation. Everything about this moment was meant to signify executive privilege at its highest level. Inside the soaring atrium, where marble pillars rose toward a vaulted ceiling festooned with crystal chandeliers, a small crowd of investors and dignitaries had already gathered. The air hummed with muted conversations about projected return on investment, retail foot traffic, and brand partnerships. Topics Clarice knew by heart from years spent negotiating lease agreements and analyzing market trends. A host of staff in crisp uniforms stood ready to greet each arriving guest, clipboard in hand and screens at the ready. At the head of the reception desk stood Denise Foster, the head hostess for the day's walkthrough, her auburn hair pulled into a tight chignon and her expression carefully neutral. Clarice approached Denise with her invitation, the document embossed in gold foil bearing the seal of Meridian Pavilion and the unmistakable signature of the company's chairman. For a fraction of a second, Denise's eyes flicked upward, recognition shimmering in her gaze before they slid away with a practiced politeness. "Good morning, Dr. Hartwell," Denise said, her tone clipped yet courteous as she extended a hand to receive the invitation. Her fingers hovered momentarily over the paper, tapping a quick message into her tablet. Clarice smiled, certain that any minor delay would soon resolve itself. But instead of being guided forward, Clarice felt a gentle but insistent hand at her elbow. Martin Hale, one of the security officers stationed discreetly behind the hostess stand, stepped forward. Tall and imposing, his uniform crisp and his expression professional, yet unyielding. He inclined his head in what was meant to be a courteous gesture. "If you'd kindly step to the side, Dr. Hartwell," he said, voice low enough that only she could hear. "We have some VIPs to process first." Confusion crossed Clarice's features, but she maintained her composure. "I have a scheduled meeting with Mr. Whitmore and the board in the executive suite at 10, she explained, calm but firm. She straightened the lapel of her jacket and offered Denise another polite nod. "I understand you may be busy, but my appointment is confirmed." Denise's lips pressed into a thin line, and she glanced at Martin as though seeking silent guidance. With a nod, Martin gently guided Clarice toward a row of sleek leather chairs set aside for general visitors. Clarice's mind registered the humiliating irony. Here in the very heart of her own project, the woman who had underwritten every structural beam and retail lease was being treated as if she were an uninvited guest. Yet she did not allow anger to surface. Instead, she kept her posture erect, her back straight, and her expression composed. The subtle tightening of her jaw was the only sign that each moment was being filed away in her mental ledger. Beyond Clarice, the Ashford family swept past. Gregory and Nadine Ashford, their 2 children in tow, dressed head to toe in designer ensembles that spoke of inherited wealth rather than earned success. Denise greeted them with effusive warmth, guiding them forward without the slightest credential check or verification. A velvet rope unfurled in their path, and an attendant materialized to escort them down the red carpet. Glasses of champagne appeared as if by magic, and the Ashfords glided toward the private elevators with the ease of royalty. Not a single staff member diverted from their service to glance in Clarice's direction. Seated now in a leather armchair that felt more like a cage, Clarice watched as other guests, some in denim and polo shirts, others in sharp business attire, were ushered through registration and into private viewing areas. Every courteous nod and polite greeting bestowed upon them felt like a personal blow. She recalled her mother's words, "Respect isn't something you demand. It's something you demonstrate every day." Clarice inhaled slowly, recalling years of navigating corporate boardrooms rife with racial bias, moments when her credibility had been questioned simply because of the color of her skin. This was merely another iteration of the same injustice. To pass the time and maintain her dignity, Clarice stood and approached a nearby refreshment station. Stainless steel machines offered bottled water and artisan coffee, their bright displays a stark contrast to the cold indifference she had just endured. She selected a bottle of water, the click of the vending mechanism echoing in the cavernous lobby. The cool plastic in her hand grounded her, reminding her that she remained in control. Around her, conversations about keynote speakers and anchor tenants drifted by, a privileged hum that excluded her. On the far side of the lobby, an intern named Isabel Tran, new to Meridian Pavilion and unfamiliar with the unwritten playbook of exclusion, leaned forward to whisper something to Denise. Clarice caught the phrase VIP access and saw Isabel's eyes flicker toward her with recognition. But Denise's practiced glare silenced the younger woman instantly. Isabel's shoulders slumped, and she let her hands fall to her sides, pretending to sort through a stack of brochures. Clarice permitted herself a small, knowing smile. She understood the choreography all too well, a show of courtesy for some, a display of control over others. Here, in this grand setting of opportunity and commerce, the unspoken hierarchy was still enforced by velvet ropes and whispered instructions. The irony was not lost on her, that the very project she had championed to elevate Meridian Pavilion's status had become the scene of her own marginalization. Minutes ticked past. Clarice returned to her chair, sat with poise, and folded her hands in her lap. She would endure this indignity as she had endured so many before. After all, true leadership was not measured by unearned deference but by unwavering resolve. Each polite rebuff, each glance of suspicion would only strengthen her determination. Her appointment time approached, and still no one came for her. Yet in that waiting, in the sting of each slight, her next move was already taking shape. A quiet strategy born of dignity, precision, and an unshakable belief in her own worth. Dr. Clarice Hartwell sat upright in the cold leather armchair, every inch of her posture radiating poise, even as the pang of humiliation pressed against her ribs like a vice. Denise Foster and Martin Hale had retreated to coordinate the next wave of VIP arrivals, but Clarice remained keenly aware of every whisper and sidelong glance aimed in her direction. The atrium's polished marble floor, meant to reflect luxury and exclusivity, felt unbearably cold. Under her gaze, she watched as a sharply dressed entrepreneur in a tailored blazer was summoned forward by Denise's bright smile. Then a well-known real estate mogul in designer loafers was ushered through the velvet rope by Martin's nod each time. The rope was clipped back into place behind them. Clarice felt it tighten around her dignity. Time had become elastic in the moments before her meeting should have begun. Clarice endured a continuous loop of micro-insults that cut deeper than a single overt rebuke. Denise leaned in close to Martin and murmured something about talent acquisition, her tone dripping with patronizing charm. Martin responded with a half-smirk that made Clarice's spine stiffen. When Denise finally looked back at Clarice, her expression flickered with faux apology. "We appreciate your patience, Dr. Hartwell. We're just prioritizing a few last-minute VIPs." The word patience hung in the air like a rebuke, rather than gratitude. She recalled the phrase she'd heard in a leadership seminar last quarter: executive privileges earned, not bestowed, and noted how quickly privilege could disappear at the first sign of discomfort. Here she was, the principal investor in the Pavilion Luxe revamp, yet treated as though her very presence were an aberration. Around her, the staff's body language shifted whenever she tried to make eye contact: hurried footsteps, averted gazes, the flicker of guilt that was instantly masked by professional indifference. A group of industry analysts approached, clutching tablets and notebooks. Denise whisked her attention away from Clarice to greet them, highlighting suite amenities and promising a curated tour experience. The analysts followed obediently, their murmurs of expectation trailing behind them like a banner. One of them paused to check his phone, then nodded approvingly as though nothing were amiss. "This place really redefines luxury," he whispered to his colleague, unaware of the storm brewing just inches away. Clarice closed her eyes briefly, taking a steadying breath. Decades of steering boardrooms and negotiating against institutional bias had taught her to harness moments like these. She remembered her mother's counsel: never let someone else's prejudice steal your power. That power was not in histrionics or angry confrontations. It was in her capacity to remain unshakable. And so she remained still, allowing the currents of disdain and discomfort to swirl around her without granting them purchase on her spirit. As the lobby's clock chimed softly, an ironic reminder that her meeting time had long elapsed, Clarice rose and moved toward the refreshment station. Her footsteps a calculated rhythm, each click of her heels on the marble punctuated her resolve. She filled a slender glass with water and paused to look at her reflection in the mirrored backsplash. The woman who stared back was unbowed, charcoal gray suit impeccable, coiffed hair flawless, eyes steady. When Clarice turned back to survey the lobby, she noticed Isabel and Brian hovering near a service counter. Her brow creased in uncertainty. Unlike her colleagues, Isabel had not met Clarice's gaze with outright contempt. Rather, there was a fleeting spark of recognition, an inkling that something was wrong. Denise caught Isabel's eye and shot her a warning glance so fierce that Isabel's shoulders drooped in reluctant compliance. The young intern busied herself with restocking brochures, her hesitation swallowed by the unspoken rule: never challenge the established order. Clarice stepped away from the refreshments and returned to her chair, hands folded calmly in her lap. She observed Martin and Denise convening near the hostess stand, their heads close enough to share secrets. She could almost hear. She did not flinch. Instead, she catalogued every word, every gesture, mental notes to serve her strategy later. This was not spite, it was precision. Throughout the atrium, bright digital displays advertised anchor tenants and predicted foot traffic increases, a testament to the project's projected success. Yet here in the same space, Clarice faced stark proof of racial bias in its rawest form. The irony was not lost on her. Racial bias had become a corporate buzzword, something to be addressed in policy manuals and online training modules, but quickly forgotten when real accountability beckoned. An announcement over the public address system invited a select group of VIPs to the executive lounge on the second level. Denise's eyes lit up and she practically darted toward the nearest guest, clipboard in hand. Martin straightened his posture, his authoritative presence restored. Meanwhile, Clarice, whose name had been on every official countdown to this expansion, was nowhere in their considerations. No invitation came for her, no escort arrived. She felt the weight of it all, the unspoken hierarchy, the glass ceiling reinforced by velvet ropes, the cruelty of being rendered invisible, even as she had invested in visibility itself. Yet as her grandmothers had taught her, true CEO leadership was measured not by the applause of the crowd, but by the steadiness with which one navigated storms. She would not seethe nor storm out. She would wait, she would watch, and she would act on her own terms. A gentle hush fell over the atrium as a high-profile sports team owner was led inside by a senior executive. The murmurs of admiration followed him like music. Clarice allowed the applause to wash over her, internalizing the humiliation like water off polished granite. Then, with the same quiet dignity that had become her trademark, she settled back into her seat. The Pavilion Luxe revamp might very well redefine retail in the region, but this day's events had reaffirmed her deeper conviction. No amount of capital could shield one from prejudice, and no amount of prejudice could eclipse genuine excellence. In the silent calculus of her mind, Clarice prepared for the next phase, one that would transform scorn into leverage, derision into an impetus for real change, and a forgotten woman in an armchair into the architect of her ultimate vindication. Dr. Clarice Hartwell rose from the sleek leather chair with a deliberate calm, her heels clicking purposefully on the polished marble floor. Each step echoed through the atrium like a measured heartbeat, reminding her that every action she took was under scrutiny. She left behind the scene of microaggressions and whispered exclusions and moved toward a stainless steel refreshment kiosk tucked discreetly in a corner. There, rows of chilled bottled water and artisan coffee selections glinted under soft LED lighting, a stark contrast to the frigid hospitality she had just endured. Clarice selected a bottle of spring water. the chill of the plastic pressing cool against her fingertips, and paused to study her reflection in the mirrored backsplash. Her tailored charcoal suit remained immaculate, her coiffed hair unmoved, her eyes steady and unflinching. This ritual of self-presentation was never vanity, but a demonstration of her unyielding professionalism, even in the face of blatant prejudice. As she turned from the glass, Clarice allowed herself a moment to catalog every slight. Denise's clipped apology, Martin's condescending nod, the velvet rope that cordoned her off, as if she were an interloper, rather than the principal stakeholder in the Pavilion Luxe revamp. She had endured inequities in countless boardrooms, but this public humiliation at Meridian Pavilion, her own company's crown jewel, felt particularly galling. She exhaled slowly, recalling her mother's counsel. You never lose when you remain composed. You simply choose how you'll leverage every slight. The irony that a $500 million project designed to elevate the mall's prestige had become the stage for her own denigration did not escape her. But Clarice's resolve remained ironclad. She would transform this indignity into her most potent strategic advantage. Retrieving her sleek smartphone from the inner pocket of her jacket, Clarice tapped through the secure app she had commissioned for executive oversight. The interface protected by multi-factor authentication and end-to-end encryption. It displayed live dashboards of project milestones and financial commitments. With a few precise swipes, she composed a directive addressed to the Pavilion Luxe Revamp Executive Committee. Immediate hold on all negotiations and site approvals. Do not proceed with any vendor contracts or investor briefings pending review of executive protocols and leadership accountability metrics. She pressed send, feeling a quiet triumph as the message disappeared into the encrypted network. Within seconds, a confirmation ping returned, her authority acknowledged and enacted. Back in the atrium, Clarice observed the subtle transformations ripple through the staff. Denise Foster, mid-conversation with a high-profile retail partner, froze and glanced at her tablet, confusion dawning on her face. Martin Hale, stationed by the private elevators, straightened his posture and exhaled sharply, as if bracing for an unwelcome gust. The velvet ropes that once only cordoned Clarice off now fluttered as attendants checked their devices and conferred in hushed tones. An executive wearing a tailored gray overcoat approached Denise, tapping rapidly on a smartphone. In a matter of heartbeats, the flow of VIP access shifted. Previously promised tours were paused, and a bulletin flashed on the digital directory. Pavilion Luxe Revamp. All negotiations suspended. Guests in designer gowns and slim-cut suits abruptly paused their conversations, dissolving into wary glances. A well-known developer, who had been smiling at his companion, now furrowed his brow and checked his calendar on a smartwatch. The bellman outside the grand entrance hesitated mid-gesture, holding the door for a limousine that had arrived just seconds earlier. In the whirlwind of disrupted protocol, Clarice watched from across the lobby, her posture serene, the water bottle still in her hand like a silent scepter. She allowed herself a faint nod of acknowledgement. Her quiet maneuver had exacted swift accountability. Meanwhile, Isabel Tran, the intern who had once dared to show Clarice a flicker of empathy, exchanged a glance with an assistant manager approaching the hostess stand. The assistant manager's lips moved, forming an apology, but the words remained bottled up as Denise's earlier warning kept Isabel silent. Still, Clarice recognized that the disruption had sown seeds of doubt in more than a few minds. The intern's eyes met Clarice's for a brief, electrifying instant, an unspoken promise that true leadership could inspire even the most reticent ally. Clarice set the water bottle on a low table beside her chair, her composure effortless. Across the atrium, she could see Martin consulting with security headquarters via radio, his tone subdued. Denise retreated to a private lounge area, looking shaken as she reviewed the message on her tablet. The hierarchy they had so meticulously maintained, white privilege reinforced by velvet ropes, racial bias masquerading as operational protocol, had collapsed in a matter of seconds under the weight of Clarice's unassailable authority. As conversations gradually resumed, they did so with a new subtext: uncertainty. The digital displays that once advertised anchor tenant announcements now flashed executive review in progress. Clarice allowed herself a small, confident smile. She had endured the indignities, cataloged each slight, and transformed them into a strategic advantage that reverberated throughout Meridian Pavilion. The project's fate and the company's reputation now hung in the balance of a phone call to the chairman, and Clarice held the only key. In that moment, poised between confrontation and control, Clarice Hartwell embodied the very essence of true CEO leadership. The ability to withstand prejudice without anger, to convert exclusion into empowerment, and to redefine privilege, not by entitlement, but by unassailable competence. As she raised her chin and prepared to return to the boardroom suite, the atrium felt smaller, a gilded cage no longer capable of containing her influence. The silent storm she had unleashed would soon force Meridian Pavilion to confront its own biases and, ultimately, to realign its values with genuine equity. Dr. Clarice Hartwell observed the stillness that had settled over the atrium as the digital directory continued to display executive review in progress. She allowed herself a brief moment to savor the shift in the atmosphere, before turning away to locate the discreet stairwell that led directly to the executive boardroom on the second floor. A brief pulse of heat gathered at the base of her skull, a familiar sign of the autoimmune condition she had managed for years, aggravated by stress and overexertion. Clarice closed her eyes for half a second, steadying her breath. There would be time for rest later. The polished steel door bore no sign or plaque. Access was granted only by authorization. Clarice raised her hand, and a biometric scanner flashed green. She stepped inside. The boardroom was a study in understated elegance. A long walnut conference table surrounded by high-backed leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the heart of the mall, and muted gray walls punctuated by abstract art. At the head of the table sat Chairman Alexander Prescott, his distinguished silver hair and calm demeanor conveying decades of corporate stewardship. A small group of senior executives and legal counsel were already assembled, their faces a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Clarice took her seat, placing the condensation-beaded water bottle neatly in front of her. "Dr. Hartwell," Prescott began, his voice measured and steady. "We've just received your directive to hold all negotiations on the Pavilion Luxe revamp. Please confirm your instructions." Clarice offered a polite nod. "Yes, Chairman Prescott. Effective immediately. No further vendor agreements, investor briefings, or site approvals until executive protocols and leadership accountability have been reviewed. We must ensure that our processes reflect the values we claim to uphold." A murmur rose around the table. Prescott raised his hand to restore silence. "Understood. Your authority as majority stakeholder and CEO is absolute in this matter. It appears there has been a significant lapse in our internal procedures, one that requires immediate action." With that, Prescott tapped a button on his console. A conference phone at the center of the table sprang to life. "I'm patching you through to Human Resources and Security Headquarters." A woman's voice crackled in the speaker. "HR, this is Prescott. Initiate termination procedures for Denise Foster, position Guest Services Manager, effective immediately for gross misconduct and violations of our non-discrimination policy. Security, terminate Martin Hale's assignment at Meridian Pavilion and revoke all access credentials. Document the reasons as discriminatory behavior and insubordination. Proceed at once." Clarice watched Denise Foster's visage on the video monitor in the corner shiver with disbelief. In the hallway outside the boardroom, Clarice could hear echoing footsteps as HR personnel and security officers mobilized. The executives around the table scribbled feverish notes while legal counsel began drafting the requisite documentation. It happened with astonishing speed. In less than 5 minutes, 2 employees who had orchestrated Clarice's public marginalization were being stripped of their roles. Meanwhile, Isabel Tran, seated unobtrusively at the far end of the table, exchanged a glance with Clarice. Though her heart raced, Isabel's posture remained respectful, yet hopeful. Behind her, Prescott turned and addressed the room. "We will announce today, effective immediately, a comprehensive diversity and inclusion training program will be mandated for all staff at Meridian Pavilion. New leadership will oversee guest services, and Isabel Tran will be appointed Junior Service Coordinator to assist in restructuring our reception protocols." An executive leaned toward Clarice. "Dr. Hartwell, your decisive action has saved this project and the company's reputation." If I may say so, never have I seen a more effective demonstration of CEO leadership in the face of prejudice. Clarice nodded appreciatively but remained composed. Thank you. This is not about retribution. It's about accountability and ensuring that every stakeholder, regardless of background, receives the respect they deserve. Minutes later, Clarice descended the stairwell back to the main atrium where a hushed crowd had gathered. Denise Foster was escorted out by 2 HR representatives, her professional composure shattered into a stunned silence. Martin Hale stood beside her, both hands clasped behind his back, watching the floor. As their badges were collected, the velvet ropes remained in place, but now they were empty, meaningless barriers. At the reception desk, Isabel and Brian approached Clarice quietly and offered her a hand. "Congratulations on your promotion," Isabel whispered. Clarice accepted the handshake with a warm smile. "Thank you, Isabel. Let's make this place deserving of its promise." Behind them, the LED directory reset to display Pavilion Luxe revamp, resuming normal operations, but the change felt hollow to onlookers. The interns and trainees, once complicit in a culture of exclusion, now watched their colleagues leave in disgrace. Conversations reopened, not about foot traffic or anchor tenants, but about journalistic headlines that were already trending. Black woman CEO holds $500 million deal hostage after racist humiliation, Meridian Pavilion executive overhaul following public discrimination, and diversity triumph or corporate PR. Inside the fallout. In the days that followed, press releases confirmed the personnel changes and launched a company-wide initiative titled Equity in Action. Workshops on unconscious bias and systemic discrimination were scheduled, and Clarice personally volunteered to lead executive seminars on inclusive leadership. Isabel Tran's name appeared in internal communications as a rising star, tasked with rebuilding the guest services department from the ground up. Her first assignment, redesign the VIP check-in process to eliminate any chance of racial profiling. Meanwhile, former employees Denise Foster and Martin Hale faced formal misconduct reports in their professional records. Their actions, deemed willful violations of federal anti-discrimination statutes, barred them from any future roles in hospitality or retail management. The message was clear: Meridian Pavilion would no longer tolerate prejudice masquerading as protocol. Clarice stood once more in the atrium, watching a new cadre of reception staff practice greeting diverse guests with genuine warmth. She allowed herself a satisfied nod. The Pavilion Luxe revamp's $500 million funding remained secure. But more importantly, the company's moral compass had been realigned. The leadership changes, swift and uncompromising, had turned humiliation into opportunity and set a precedent for corporate accountability that would ripple far beyond the polished marble floors of Meridian Pavilion. Dr. Clarice Hartwell stood in the atrium of Meridian Pavilion one final time before returning to her corner office overlooking the bustling shopping concourse. The morning light filtered through the glass roof, casting prisms of soft color across the newly polished marble. In the weeks since she had seized control of the Pavilion Luxe revamp, Meridian Pavilion had undergone a transformation that transcended mere structural renovation. Where once the reception area had been a gauntlet of exclusion, now a diverse lineup of greeters, men and women of every ethnicity, smiled genuinely and offered warm, respectful greetings. Clarice watched a family of 4 step forward, the parents, both professionals of South Asian descent, and their 2 daughters wide-eyed with delight. As the children skipped past the velvet ropes, no barrier slowed them, and not a single staff member hesitated. Upstairs in Clarice's office, state-of-the-art monitors displayed live metrics. Tenant lease signings were back on track, retention projections looked stronger than ever, and consumer sentiment scores had spiked. Most gratifying was the new Guest Equity Index, a proprietary metric Clarice had championed to track customer experience across demographic segments. 1 month ago, under the old regime, it had languished in the low 30s. Now it hovered above 85. That shift, more than any financial forecast, affirmed that equitable treatment translated directly into business success. Clarice pressed a soft chime on her desk and was joined by Isabel Tran, now promoted to Junior Service Coordinator. Isabel's face was alight with excitement as she unfurled a blueprint for the redesigned VIP check-in area. Gone were the velvet ropes. In their place stood a semicircular reception desk, staffed by 2 greeters and 1 security attendant, each trained in bias awareness. A digital kiosk allowed guests to scan invitations, triggering personalized warm welcomes. On overhead screens, Isabel pointed out an integrated feedback station where visitors could share real-time comments, anonymous but monitored by a diversity task force. "We piloted it yesterday," Isabel said. "Every guest felt noticed, not screened. It's already reducing wait times and improving satisfaction scores across the board." Clarice nodded, pride shining in her eyes. "Excellent work, Isabel. This is the tangible result of our values in action." She leaned back in her ergonomic chair and surveyed the city skyline beyond the office windows. "When we first talked, you said you believed Meridian Pavilion could be a model of inclusivity. You were right." Isabel beamed, and for a moment, the 2 women shared a quiet celebration of change that neither could have achieved alone. Meanwhile, beyond the vaulted ceilings of the pavilion, the broader community responded to Meridian's turnaround. Local news outlets carried human interest stories, profiles of former employees Denise Foster and Martin Hale, both now enrolled in state-mandated sensitivity training programs. Their disciplinary reports, available under public record, detailed forced resignations and the loss of professional licenses. Harsh but necessary measures that served as cautionary tales across the industry. One segment followed Denise as she volunteered at an after-school mentorship program for at-risk youth, her voice soft with regret as she recounted the moment she had looked past Clarice's credentials. "I let my privilege blind me," she said. "Now I'm committed to unlearning biases that nearly destroyed my career." Martin's story took a different arc. Feeling the sting of ostracism, he had relocated to another state and joined a community policing initiative, determined to rebuild trust with those he once dismissed. News cameras caught him at a neighborhood town hall meeting, admitting, "I reported to my job thinking I was keeping my community safe. Instead, I was perpetuating the very divisions I should have dismantled." Both stories ran alongside commentary from business journals analyzing Meridian Pavilion's rebound. Subscriber counts surged for the mall's loyalty program, and anchor tenants, once skeptical of leadership turmoil, renewed their leases at premium rates. For Clarice, these public reckonings underscored a lesson she cherished. True redemption required more than policy memos. It demanded personal accountability and sustained effort. She convened monthly accountability roundtables, bringing together former critics, displaced employees, and community advocates. One meeting featured a panel discussion on systemic bias in retail environments, where Clarice herself moderated conversations between grassroots activists and executive leaders from competitor malls. The resulting white paper, published on Meridian Pavilion's website, offered actionable recommendations for the industry, from anonymized application processes to rotating cultural competency workshops. At dusk, Clarice walked through the newly completed north wing of Pavilion Luxe. Its broad corridors were lined with global brands and artisanal pop-up shops curated from underrepresented communities. She paused at an interactive mural titled Faces of Meridian, composed of portraits submitted by metro area residents. There, among hundreds of faces, she saw her own image discreetly included, a reminder that leadership was not about erasure but about integration. Underneath the mural, a plaque read, "Inclusion is the architecture of progress." Her day ended in a board meeting where the final capital call was executed, officially funding the last phase of the $500 million expansion. As the numbers flashed on the screen, she sensed not triumph, but responsibility. The weight of every promise she'd made to stakeholders, employees, and the community. When the meeting adjourned, she sent one last message, a thank you note to the entire staff, acknowledging their resilience, their willingness to change, and their belief in a vision that transcended profit margins. That night, in the quiet of her home study, Clarice placed a glass of water on her desk, echoing the first water bottle she had purchased in that same atrium. When exclusion threatened to diminish her resolve, she opened a leather-bound journal and wrote one final entry. "We built more than a mall. We built a testament to dignity. Wherever courage meets compassion, progress follows." May Meridian's light guide every institution from blind tradition to intentional inclusion. True leadership isn't demanded, it's recognized. No amount of privilege can silence excellence, and no act of exclusion can extinguish the power of an unwavering vision. Hello family, welcome to Stories with Storytime. Please subscribe and leave a like for us. It means the world to us. Also share this video to your friends and loved ones and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you. Hello family, welcome to Stories with Storytime. Please subscribe and leave a like for us. It means the world to us. Also share this video to your friends and loved ones and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you. Hello family, welcome to Stories with Storytime. Please subscribe and leave a like for us. It means the world to us. Also share this video to your friends and loved ones and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you. Hello family, welcome to Stories with Storytime. Please subscribe and leave a like for us. It means the world to us. Also share this video to your friends and loved ones and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you. Hello family, welcome to Stories with Storytime. Please subscribe and leave a like for us. It means the world to us. Also share this video to your friends and loved ones and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you. Hello family, welcome to Stories with Storytime. Please subscribe and leave a like for us. It means the world to us. Also share this video to your friends and loved ones and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you.